Hi, I'm Brian.
Okay, everybody, so here we are again. Unfortunately for me, if you've ever watched any of my videos, there's a good chance you've seen me in this location before. But you can go back and watch some of those videos. I'll link to them, or I'll try and give a quick little recap here. So this is what's called ranch pipe, and it's an economical way to get water to run a pretty good distance. So we've got a good run of it on our property because we have a well share that's a little ways away from our property. So this stuff gets our water to us, which is great, except there are various points where connections have to be made. Either you just couldn't get the pipe that long, or it's had to have been cut in the past, or you have to tee off, or whatever reason, you have to make connections. So those connections are made with little connectors that slide into here, and use hose clamps on either side of those. And that's all fine until, you know, things like, depending on how deep you dig the pipe, you put the pipe, and what's happening on the surface, like heavy machinery, freeze and thaw of the ground. So what's happened to us this particular time is, this is a section that we've actually repaired in the past, and there's a couple of those connection points in here. And I believe in this case, just the freeze and the thaw of the ground is enough to be moving those connections. And they're just not that great, and they get, you know, they don't burst open or anything, but they're enough to cause a leak. So the ground gets wet, and you can tell, and you have to dig it up. It doesn't stop the water at our house, but it means we're leaking, and that's wasting water. So I'm here today to cut out a section and put a new section in. There's actually a couple connections in here that I can kind of replace with just 2 connections on either end. It was kind of pieced together here. So that's what I've got this for. I've got all the connections I need and everything, but I'm gonna go one step further this time, because like I said, I've fixed this once before, and I've seen this happen in multiple places where just the movement of the ground, either from a truck driving over it or the freeze and thaw, the connections really just don't seem to hold up very well. So I'm gonna go one step further and see if I can fix that problem. So I'm gonna make 2 connections. I'm gonna cut out a section here, and I'm gonna make a connection at each end. And what I'm gonna do is, so it'll be the normal connection with this connector and these hose clamps on either side. But after I do that, or before I do that, I'm gonna put this piece of PVC over top of this. And then I'm gonna make that connection. And then I'm gonna slide the PVC back over it. And I'm gonna hope that PVC acts as kind of I'm gonna put it on there like a sleeve or a collar over that connection point, that joint. And I'm gonna hope it acts as a little bit of a buffer from the ground moving, either from above or from the shifting from freeze and thaw. So I'm hoping that'll protect some of those joints that I'm making, so that I'll only have to make this fix once now. So that's what I'm gonna try to do. Let's see if it works out. In case you were wondering, I don't know if you saw that, but I did turn the water off and even opened the spigot to kind of run all the water out of the line, but there was still a bit in there. So I've just run a little bit of Teflon tape around that connector. Really shouldn't be necessary, but again, because I've had these fail on me multiple times now, I'm willing to go maybe a little extra step. So basically it just kind of fattens these up a little bit, so they're hopefully a little tighter in that tube. So hopefully that'll help. Let me take you in for a close-up of that. So there's one connection made. You can see I put the PVC on that. Again, after this connection is finished, I will slide the PVC over. I'm stuck in the dirt right now, but I'll slide that PVC down over that connection. This is the old pipe, so I'm gonna cut this out. So that's next. That's one side of the connection. Put 2 of these clamps on the piece of pipe coming in here and tighten them down, and that'll be one connection made. I've learned from doing this a couple of times that you always want a nice straight clean cut on this tubing before you put it on one of those connectors, or else, you know, if it gets angled or something, the connection isn't real great, it gets harder to put that clamp on there and really clamp it down. So I always kind of make a nice clean cut on whatever I bought. So here's one side of the connection completely made. You can see the little gray piece of the connector in between the two tubes. 2 hose clamps on either side. Little note on these hose clamps, something I've learned over time is those little slits. So you want to get those hose clamps down tight, but you have to be a little careful because if you pull too tight, it will actually break those and that clip will be worthless. So that clamp. So there's one end. Like I said, that's my PVC that I'll just slide over that. I'll obviously wait, I'll turn the water back on, make sure everything's working before I slide that over, but the final thing will be to slide that over, and I think I'm going to, this is a little bit of overkill, but if it saves me from having to do this again, I've got some spray foam. It was actually left over from kind of a previous job, so I think after I slide this, after I'm convinced this isn't leaking, and after I slide this PVC over, it's only about 2.5 feet or so, again, just a little collar over this joint, I think I'm going to fill that PVC with spray foam in between. And the idea is just to give a little buffer to this tube. So if this ground, you know, if something heavy drives over this, or if the ground moves a little bit from freeze and thaw, hopefully this tube will provide a little bit of buffer. This tube will take the stress and leave this joint kind of alone. So that's the idea here. So I just have to repeat this down the other end. And with another piece of this, I'll do it exactly the same way. Turn everything on, make sure it doesn't leak, and then seal it all up. Okay, so I think I'm all done. I'm gonna try and walk the length of this with you now. Here's the first part I did. There's that sleeve that will slide over this joint. So there's one connector with 2 hose clamps on either side. And then this stretch of tubing that I got fresh for this part of the job, I'll talk about that piece of wood in a second, runs all the way down here. There's the other collar or sleeve that's going to fit over this joint. So I've taken what was 3 joints down to 2. And again, unfortunately, I've done this a few times, but I think I've learned a few things by doing it a few times. And I have to say that this particular one is, I think, the cleanest and tightest one I've done so far. So hopefully that means it's going to hold today and hold for a long time. And hopefully this sleeve idea will give a little extra protection to these joints, so I don't really have to ever visit this again. Let's hope. The piece of wood now, that was just temporary. This tubing, this ranch tubing, comes on a roll, a big roll. I think they come in 500-foot rolls or something. They're either 100 or 500. But when you buy it from the store, they cut you a piece, and you know it's coiled up and it holds its shape pretty good. So it helps to get the right length. To kind of straighten it out a little bit. So I left it out in the sun actually for a couple of days, and I've got that piece of wood pushing against it just to keep it from, it wants to hold its bend, you know, that it had on the roll. So that helped me straighten it out so I could get the right length to cut down here. So that was that. And along those same lines, if you're ever dealing with this stuff, what I've also found is that the longer the stretch that you have to repair, you know, within reason, the better off you are. And what I'm trying to say is, if you try and replace a foot or 2 of this stuff, that bend, or 3 feet, that bend that happens on the roll and the 2, if you're trying to replace maybe a 3-foot section with a joint on either side, right? What you're gonna find is it's hard to kind of get those things to all come together. But when you've got a longer stretch, this one's about 13 feet or so, you have a little more play in the tube so that you can kind of bend so that you can get those 2 ends to meet to put them together. It's really hard to get them to meet up, as I found when I replaced a T up by the house. I believe I did a video on that one. That was really difficult to fit all those pieces together. So again, if you can get 5, 6, 10 feet, you actually have a lot better chance of getting a nice connection because you've got a little more play in the tubing. So I'm talking about all this. I haven't turned the water on yet. I am crossing my fingers again. It looks better than any of the fixes I've done so far to this ranch tubing. So I'm optimistic, but I've got to turn the water on. I'll probably leave it for a day or 2 this way just to make sure that there's not a single drip before I actually implement, you know, sliding these collars over and filling them with the spray foam. But if they don't leak over the next day or 2, then I'll feel pretty confident. And hopefully with the addition of those sleeves, that'll be a fix that'll last a long time. So here's the finished product. I wish I could tell you that this is immediately following my last fix, but it isn't. I put some, some Teflon tape on those connectors. And when I put it together and turned the water back on, I had a drip. Not bad, but a drip. So I thought about it. I thought about more tape. I thought about less tape. So I actually tried. I wish I had a close-up picture, but I think I've shown you. Well, you saw the connector, I think, close up. It's got sort of like ribs or barbs on it. So then I thought to myself, well, maybe by using the Teflon tape, I'm actually negating the effect of those ribs or barbs. So I actually took the Teflon tape off and put it back together. That actually leaked worse. Now, keep in mind, every time you put this tubing, you push it onto one of those connectors and pull it off of one of those connectors, it might be stretching it a little bit. So it could have to do with the fact that I wasn't working with a clean connection. But after that didn't work and it leaked worse, I actually went with more tape. So I wrapped the Teflon tape around there 5-6 times. And I actually had to heat up the tubing to push it on, to loosen it up. Heated it up, pushed it on. It went on really tight. And then I left it alone for a while, let it cool, tightened down the clamps. And I think the cooling should let it kind of expand and harden. And then when I turned it back on, it actually worked. So it's been quite an adventure trying to get these things to not leak each time. So what you're seeing here is what I said I would do, and it's another experiment, another test. But because this has happened more than once now, I've put kind of a sleeve of PVC. The connection point is kind of right in the middle here, and I actually sprayed an expanding foam in there. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. What it means is, I won't be able to get at that thing to make a fix, but what I found anyway is that once these things fail, you kind of just have to cut them out anyway. So what's the difference? If I have to come back to this in the future, I'll just cut down here and start over. So that's kind of what I had to do anyway, so I figured it wouldn't hurt. That expanding foam I don't think is strong enough to actually hurt the tubing, because the tubing is somewhat flexible, but I think it should have just expanded and filled that gap and hopefully provide a little bit of a buffer in there for when the ground moves from expansion and contraction, cooling and freezing and thawing. So I've got that over my 2 joints. So, this has been sitting for a couple days without this sleeve on here, and we didn't have any leaks. So we've now sealed it up kind of for good. Hopefully that doesn't have any adverse effects on the connection. And I'm going to start filling this in now.